Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Scotty.
Okay, so I got to start off. What is in it for China to now be pushing their investment in Mexico?
Well, they've been expanding their reach economically around the globe. They've done a lot of investment in Africa over the last couple of years that America has kind of ignored. They're obviously expanding their footprint in South and Central America, and now they're right in our backyard with these energy acquisitions and investments. And I think you're going to see it continue to move forward. You know, we've got an administration that has ignored the old Monroe Doctrine that essentially for 200 years has said, stay out of our backyard if you're another country. And we've replaced that with the Biden welcome mat that certainly the Chinese are taking advantage of.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, we have been known, America, to put their nose in places where they're not necessarily next to. So, you know what? If we're not abiding by our own doctrine, why should anybody else? But that being said, you first brought up this idea of China looking specifically into this tech sector and the energy sector in regards to Mexico. Why do you think that is?
Well, we've kind of shut the door on our own energy independence. You know, we've become energy independent. We've become an energy exporter, and now we're shutting down the pipeline that allowed us to do that. We're laying back on the fracking that allowed us to expand our own use of resources. So I think you're seeing not only the Chinese, but others around the world being willing to fill that energy void. I mean, you've already got Canada also looking at how they export more to China and other Asian nations. So the Chinese are looking at the new administration's policies on energy. It's leaving a vacuum, and they'll fill that void.
Well, and that's what China is probably good at, taking advantage of a situation like this. China's also, though, known for having this cheap labor, but guess what? So is Mexico. A lot of criticism there on how their workers are treated. They're not having to hold the same standards that America has to for their workers. Should this be even more concerning, though, to the American worker who was already competing to keep their jobs, their companies on this side of the border?
Well, one of the things that President Trump heralded was the new NAFTA that was going to fix some of the relations, some of the imbalance in trade with Mexico. And now you've got China coming in, and they're going to take advantage of the fact that while the U.S. has imposed new regulations on Mexico in order to import into the U.S., new environmental regulations, new labor regulations that are being imposed on Mexican companies, well, the Chinese are going to come in and say, hey, those rules don't apply with us. If you want to dump toxic materials into the groundwater, if you want to dump your manufacturing excess somewhere, we don't care about that. It's not going to hurt us. And we're not going to impose labor restrictions on your workers when we're not imposing them on our own. So again, the disadvantage that America is creating for itself in the world trade arena, whether it's taxes, whether it's regulations, are certainly going to be taken advantage of by other countries, and the Chinese are moving into the front of the line.
Well, we haven't talked about, probably I would say, like the white elephant that's in the room, of why China's main motivation to do this. I mean, it just happens to be that Mexico is just south of our border, and there's such an obviously tension between the United States and China going forward. We've talked about the economic side. I want to talk about the national security threat. As China has continued to build up their military, and we have seen them build it up, like you said, in other parts of the world, what is this from a national security standpoint? Could this be concerning about them actually being in our backyard this close to U.S. Territory in the future?
Well, I think that's a great point. And when we think about national security, it is not just military. It's not just airplanes and tanks and bullets and rifles. It's also economic clout and influence within a region as well. I mean, during the Cold War, you had Russia and the U.S. constantly battling just for influence in different regions and sort of the domino effect. If one country flipped to communism versus democracy or vice versa, that was the playground everybody was playing in. So you've got the Chinese now. I don't think there's an immediate military threat with the Chinese doing more investment in Mexico, but there is certainly an economic impact, and there is an influence impact as you look again at what they're doing in Africa, country after country, where they're providing the investment dollars, they're providing the vehicles for economic growth that we're ignoring, and now they can do that in Central America, South America, and then right at our own border as well. It is clearly a national security concern, even if it's not necessarily a military concern.
Well, and that's what we're looking at right now in regards to things that are going on with Mexico. How is this going to actually handle? Or is this going to help trade tensions between the United States and Mexico? Like I said, we just got through this policy last year, but we have a new sheriff in town. So do you think this is actually going to help when there's already so much tension with China? Is this going to help the United States and Mexico relations, especially considering the current standpoint right now that we're having problems at the border, and the Mexican president is not so happy with Biden saying that, you know, he's welcomed him and it's actually hurting his own country as well?
Yes, one of the things that we had seen with Mexico is that they have very tough regulations and laws with respect to illegal immigration. They actually treat illegals as illegally entering their country. But they were not really enforcing those rules as long as a lot of the caravans from South and Central America were simply transitioning through Mexico rather than to Mexico. Well, the Trump administration was able to get them on board with stopping that flow of people through Mexico to the U.S. by holding them in Mexico and making it clear that they were not going to be admitted into Mexico to make that transition. And now that's completely changed. We're seeing a flood of illegals. We're seeing them not only come to the border, but through the border. And that is making things difficult in Mexico as well. You know, when you've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people transversing across Mexico, they're like locusts. They're consuming products. They're not always paying for the goods and water and food that they consume on their way through. It is an economic challenge for Mexico, not just for when they get into our country and provide a challenge to us and our workers as well. So Mexico is not very happy with the situation. And I think that while China is certainly making their move into Mexico as a way to kind of get in our face, Mexico is happy to oblige, I think, and join them in showing the big, giant America that they're not necessarily going to back down whenever we bark in the future.
Well, and Mexico is just one small key part of central and, more importantly, southern parts of this hemisphere. What is this going to do for other countries right now? Are they also going to be looking to bond with China? And what threat could that pose, both when we're talking about tariffs, intellectual property, monetary policy, with the relationship between the United States and the rest of the southern part of this hemisphere?
I think it's very concerning. We've already seen Russia kind of back away from our cooperation in space, moving to an allegiance with China to start kind of a dual process of them expanding their exploration of space, their platform in space. You've got other countries, North Korea, that's basically not talking to us. They're flouting their new independence from the progress that had been made under the Trump administration. This president and this administration did not strike any intimidation or any respect among other world leaders, and you're already seeing that just less than 6 months into this administration. It is going to continue. It is going to get worse before it gets better, and unfortunately, it's going to play out in a negative way for the U.S. economically, strategically, and perhaps militarily as we look at other hotspots around the world that threaten to inflame.
Well, Steve, like always, thank you for giving us some insight into this. We will see where this goes. Like I said, I feel like, we obviously spent 2 years working on a deal with China. Then the coronavirus hit, and guess what? Now we're almost back to square one, if not taking a few steps back. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Scotty.